Part 1. The Galactic Archivists had been keeping records for 12,000 years. They lived on a station at the center of known space, and their job was simple but important. They measured fear. Every species that reached the stars eventually learned about the Cosmic Terror Index. It was a list that ranked all known species by how frightening they were to others. They sat at the top of the list for 6,000 years. They were massive creatures with ships that could crack planets in half. When they arrived in a star system, entire civilizations surrendered without firing a single shot. Second place belonged to a species of psychic parasites that could crawl into your thoughts and hollow out your mind from the inside. They had emptied whole star systems of intelligent life, leaving nothing but mindless shells behind. When humans first made contact with the galactic community, the archivists studied them carefully. They measured human technology, which was average. They examined human biology, which was unremarkable. They tested human combat ability, which was competent but nothing special. After careful consideration, they placed humanity at rank 847 out of 912 cataloged species. The only note of interest in the human file was a single observation. Despite having nuclear weapons, biological warfare, and climate instability, humans had somehow avoided destroying themselves. The archivists marked this as unusual persistence and moved on to more important matters. Ambassador learned about the ranking during her first month at Station Terminus. She was Earth's representative to the galactic community, a position that mostly involved attending boring meetings and smiling politely at aliens who looked down on her species. When an archivist showed her humanity's position on the index, she laughed. 847, she said. Out of 912, we're barely in the top 1,000. The archivist, a creature that looked like a floating collection of crystals, did not understand humor. The ranking is accurate based on available data. Humanity poses minimal threat to other species. Kept smiling, but something cold settled in her stomach. She had read enough history to know what happened to species that seemed weak. In the galaxy, just like on Earth, the weak were often prey. 3 months later, her fears proved correct. The Dominion fleet appeared at the edge of human space without warning. 200 massive ships materialized from faster-than-light travel, their hulls covered in strange biological growths. The Dominion ranked third on the Cosmic Terror Index. They were a species that believed in perfection through biological modification. They did not conquer worlds to rule them. They conquered worlds to harvest the population. Every species had something useful in their genetics. The Dominion collected these useful traits and added them to their own biology. Over thousands of years, they had become something monstrous. Their soldiers had armored shells, multiple limbs, enhanced senses, and healing abilities stolen from 100 different species. They looked at humanity and saw raw material. Earth's leaders received the Dominion's demands within hours. Surrender unconditionally. Allow the harvesting to proceed. In exchange, 10% of the human population would be allowed to survive as a breeding stock. Was recalled from Station Terminus immediately. She arrived on Earth to find chaos. Military leaders were arguing about defense strategies. Politicians were debating whether to accept the terms. Scientists were looking for any weakness in Dominion technology. Everyone was afraid. She attended an emergency meeting in Geneva, deep underground in a bunker that had been built for nuclear war. The leaders of Earth's major nations sat around a long table, their faces gray with fear. On the wall, screens showed the Dominion fleet moving closer. "We cannot win a direct fight," said the admiral in charge of Earth's combined fleet. "Our ships are decades behind theirs. Our weapons will barely scratch their hulls." "Then we negotiate," said a diplomat from the Eastern Coalition. "Perhaps we can offer something else, resources, technology, anything but lives." "The Dominion does not negotiate," said. Everyone turned to look at her. "I've studied their history. They have conquered 400 worlds. Not once have they accepted anything other than complete surrender." Then what do you suggest? Asked the Secretary General of the United Nations. Thought about the Cosmic Terror Index. She thought about how the archivists measured fear. They looked at weapons and ships and physical power. They counted how many worlds a species had destroyed, how many enemies they had crushed. But humanity had never been powerful in that way. Humans had survived by being clever, by adapting, by understanding things that stronger creatures overlooked. And there was one thing humans understood better than any species in the galaxy. We fight them with fear, said. The room went quiet. The Admiral frowned. Fear. Ambassador, the Dominion ranks third on the Terror Index. They have conquered hundreds of worlds. What could we possibly do to frighten them? Stood up and walked to the main screen. She pulled up a file she had been preparing since the Dominion fleet first appeared. It contained thousands of entries, organized by category and effect. The archivists measure terror by physical power, she said. But that's not what fear really is. Fear is not about what can hurt you. Fear is about what you cannot understand, what you cannot predict, what lives in the dark spaces of your mind. She began playing clips on the screen. Horror films from every era of human history, scenes of monsters and ghosts and things that logic, art depicting nightmares, stories read aloud, tales of beings that stalked the living, sounds designed to trigger panic, images that felt wrong in ways the conscious mind could not explain. Humans have been scaring themselves for 40,000 years, said. We have an entire art form dedicated to fear. We have cataloged every nightmare, studied every phobia, mapped every dark corner of our psychology. We know exactly what makes an intelligent mind break. The leaders watched the screen with growing unease. Even knowing these were human creations, designed for entertainment, something about the images and sounds made their skin crawl. The Dominion has never faced anything like this, continued. They understand fear as a tool for conquest. They frighten others by being powerful, but we understand fear as a science. We know how to build it, shape it, and deliver it directly into the mind. The Secretary General leaned forward. You want to send them horror movies? I want to send them a message, said. I want them to know that we have spent our entire existence as a species learning what terror really means, and then I want to show them. She transmitted the files to the command center. Within minutes, every transmitter in the solar system was broadcasting the same signal toward the Dominion fleet. Thousands of hours of human horror, sent in formats the Dominion could understand, accompanied by a single message translated into their language. The message was simple. We learn to fear in the dark. We will teach you. The Dominion commander who received the transmission was named. He had led subjugation fleets for 30 years. He had crushed resistance on dozens of worlds. When his communications officer brought him the human transmission, he watched a few minutes of it and laughed. Primitive psychological warfare, he said. They send us fictional stories because they cannot fight us with weapons. Begin the advance. We will reach there within the week. His officers acknowledged the order. The fleet moved forward, and on Earth watched the Dominion ships approaching and felt something strange in her chest. It was not fear, it was anticipation. The Dominion thought they understood terror. They had conquered 400 worlds after all. They had seen every form of resistance, every desperate attempt to avoid harvesting. They believed nothing could surprise them anymore. They were wrong. Humanity had spent its entire existence creating nightmares, not because humans were evil or cruel, but because facing fear in stories helped them survive fear in reality. Every monster in every tale taught humans something about the darkness inside themselves. Every horror movie trained human minds to endure the worst their imagination could create. And now, for the first time in galactic history, that knowledge was going to be used as a weapon. The Dominion fleet continued its advance. Human ships moved to intercept, knowing they could not win through firepower alone. On both sides, soldiers prepared for battle, but only one side understood what the battle would really involve. Fear was coming for the Dominion, and it would not look like anything they expected. Part 2. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Harvester's Glory, and watched the human fleet approach on his tactical display. The numbers almost made him feel pity for the primitive species. Earth had gathered everything they had, and it amounted to less than a quarter of his force. Their ships were smaller, slower, and carried weapons that would barely dent Dominion armor. "They are brave," said his second officer, a creature whose body had been modified with armored plates and additional eyes taken from conquered species. "Foolish, but brave." Made a sound of agreement. Bravery is common in prey. It rarely changes the outcome. The battle began exactly as he expected. Human ships fired their weapons, and the energy splashed harmlessly against Dominion shields. His fleet returned fire, and human vessels exploded in bright flashes of light. Within the first hour, humanity lost a third of its fleet. Within the second hour, half. But then something strange happened. Instead of retreating, the remaining human ships accelerated toward the Dominion fleet. They were not attacking. They were ramming themselves into Dominion vessels. Watched as a human cruiser slammed into one of his destroyers. The impact damaged both ships, but neither was destroyed. The human vessel attached itself to the Dominion hull like a parasite. "They are mad," his officer said. "They waste their ships on meaningless gestures." But felt a small thread of unease. Human tactics were strange, yes, but they were not random. Every species fought with purpose. What purpose did this serve? The answer came when the first boarding reports arrived. Dominion soldiers entered the disabled human ships expecting easy victories. What they found was different. The human crews had abandoned the main sections of their vessels, retreating into the deepest parts of the ships. Every corridor leading to them had been transformed. The lights did not work properly. They flickered in irregular patterns, creating shadows that seemed to move on their own. Strange sounds echoed through the metal halls, sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature dropped until frost formed on the walls, then suddenly spiked until the air burned. Nothing was consistent. Nothing could be predicted. The first squad to enter a modified human ship reported contacts ahead. Their commanding officer ordered them to advance. They rounded a corner and found something waiting. It was not a human soldier. It was a shape, a figure that stood at the edge of the darkness where the lights did not reach. It did not move. It did not attack. It simply watched. The squad opened fire. Their weapons passed through the figure without effect. When they stopped firing, the shape was closer. None of them had seen it move. They fired again. The shape vanished. Then the screaming started. One soldier swore something had touched him, something cold and wet that whispered in a language he did not understand. Another saw faces in the metal walls, faces that opened their mouths in silent screams. A third simply dropped his weapon and began running back the way they had come, knocking aside his in blind panic. The squad fell apart in minutes. When reinforcements found them, 3 were dead, 2 were catatonic, and the last one kept repeating the same words over and over. "It knows what we fear. It knows what we fear." Commander read the report with growing concern. He ordered more soldiers into the human ships, veterans with decades of combat experience. They fared no better. The humans had done something to their vessels, transformed them into environments designed to attack the mind rather than the body. Every detail was calculated. The sounds played at frequencies that triggered primal panic, bypassing conscious thought entirely. The visual effects exploited quirks of perception, creating shapes that the brain interpreted as threats even when logic said they were impossible. The temperature changes kept the body in constant stress, unable to adapt or relax. And there were the figures, the shapes that waited in the dark. Scientists analyzed recordings and found nothing supernatural. The figures were projections, holograms, tricks of light and shadow, But knowing they were fake did not stop them from being terrifying. The human designs targeted something deeper than reason. They targeted instinct, evolution, the ancient parts of the mind that still remembered what it meant to be prey. Within 3 days, Dominion soldiers were refusing boarding assignments. Veterans who had fought on 100 worlds looked at disabled human ships and could not make themselves enter. Officers had to threaten execution to force squads through the airlocks. And still, fewer came back than went in. Tried a different approach. He ordered his ships to destroy the human vessels from a distance, refusing to board them at all. But the humans adapted. Their remaining ships stopped ramming and started something worse. They began transmitting. Every Dominion vessel received the same signal. It was not a demand for surrender or a plea for mercy. It was something else entirely. Audio files, visual files, patterns of light and sound that seemed meaningless at first, but exposure changed things. Soldiers began having nightmares, not the normal dreams of battle and death, but something different. They dreamed of being watched by things they could not see. They dreamed of corridors that led nowhere, of rooms that changed when they looked away, of their own bodies becoming strange and wrong. They woke up screaming, and sometimes they did not stop. Ordered the transmissions blocked, but the damage was done. The ideas had taken root. His soldiers looked at shadows and wondered what might be hiding there. They heard noises in the ship's systems and could not convince themselves it was just machinery. Fear spread through the fleet like a disease, passed from soldier to soldier through whispered stories and sleepless eyes. On Earth, Ambassador coordinated the defense from her bunker beneath Geneva. She did not celebrate the reports of Dominion difficulties. There was nothing to celebrate in what humanity was doing. They were taking the darkest parts of human imagination and inflicting them on another species. It was effective, but it was not clean. "How much longer can we maintain this?" asked the general sitting beside her. Studied the tactical display. The Dominion fleet had stopped advancing. They were holding position just outside the orbit of Mars, their ships clustered together as if seeking comfort in numbers. Human losses were catastrophic, over 70% of the fleet destroyed, but the Dominion had stopped. "As long as we need to," she said. "Fear does not run out of ammunition." She authorized the next phase. Human operatives who had allowed themselves to be captured began their work inside Dominion ships. They did not try to sabotage systems or assassinate officers. They did something simpler. They changed small things. They moved objects when no one was watching. They left marks on walls that had not been there before. They whispered in empty corridors and then disappeared before anyone could find them. The Dominion were a proud species. They had conquered 400 worlds. They did not panic over small things, but small things accumulate. When a soldier finds his belongings moved 3 nights in a row, he begins to wonder. When an officer sees the same strange symbol scratched into different bulkheads throughout the ship, she begins to fear. When the entire crew knows that something is wrong but no one can explain what, the fear becomes contagious. Received a report that one of his lieutenants had spaced herself. She had carved words into her own armored shell before walking into an airlock. The words were in human script. They translated to a simple phrase: "It follows." He did not know what that meant. He did not want to know. The Dominion fleet had stopped advancing. For the first time in the long history of their conquests, they did not know what to do next. Their soldiers were breaking. Their officers were afraid. And the humans kept transmitting, kept whispering, kept showing them new nightmares. On Earth, received a message from the Galactic Archivists. They were requesting updated data on humanity for the Cosmic Terror Index. Their classification algorithms were returning errors. Human threat levels did not fit any existing category. She sent them a reply with a single line: "We are not finished teaching." Part 3. The Dominion retreat was not announced. There were no negotiations, no treaties, no formal end to hostilities. One day the fleet was holding position near Mars, and the next day they were gone. 200 ships activated their faster-than-light drives and vanished from human space without a word. Commander filed his report to the Dominion High Council. He used careful language, speaking of strategic repositioning and resource conservation. He did not mention the soldiers who had gone mad. He did not mention the officers who refused to sleep. He did not mention his own nightmares, the dreams that still came every night, the feeling that something was watching him from just outside his field of vision. His report recommended that humanity be marked as non-viable for harvesting. The resources required to overcome their psychological defenses would exceed the biological value of their population. The High Council accepted his recommendation without debate. No member wanted to argue for a second attempt. The Galactic Archivists received the news with great interest. They had been tracking the conflict closely, updating their models with every report. For the first time in 3,000 years, they convened an emergency session to discuss a single species. Ambassador attended via holographic projection from Earth. She stood in a chamber filled with floating crystal beings, each one representing a different branch of Archivist society. Their light patterns flickered as they communicated, too fast for human eyes to follow. But they had provided a translator and listened as the archivists debated humanity's new ranking. "The data is clear," said the senior archivist. Humanity repelled a Dominion subjugation fleet with minimal direct military engagement. Their casualties were severe, but the psychological damage they inflicted on the enemy was unprecedented. The Dominion fleet without achieving any objectives. "This suggests a significant increase in threat ranking," said another archivist. "We calculate that humanity should move from position 847 to approximately position 200. "That calculation is insufficient," said a third. "Humanity did not win through superior firepower or military strategy. They won through psychological manipulation at a level we have never documented. Our standard metrics do not apply." The debate continued for hours. The archivists were precise beings who valued accurate data above all else. They struggled with humanity because humans their models. Every other species on the Cosmic Terror Index could be measured by physical capability. Ships, weapons, soldiers, territory. These things could be counted and compared. Humans had demonstrated something different. They had taken fear itself, the thing that the index was supposed to measure, and turned it into a weapon. It was like trying to use a ruler to measure the concept of distance. The tool was not designed for the task. In the end, the archivists reached a decision that had never been made before. They created a new classification. "Humanity is hereby listed as unclassifiable on the Cosmic Terror Index," the senior archivist announced. "Standard threat metrics do not apply. Additional notation has been added indicating capability for psychological warfare beyond conventional parameters." Accepted the decision with a simple nod. She did not feel proud. The war had cost humanity dearly. Over 70% of Earth's fleet had been destroyed. Thousands of soldiers had died. And the methods they had used, the psychological weapons they had deployed, those would leave scars on both sides. But they had survived. Against a force that had conquered 400 worlds, humanity had held the line. In the months that followed, Earth began to receive unusual diplomatic communications. Species that had previously ignored humanity suddenly wanted to establish relations. Some were afraid. They had heard stories about what happened to the Dominion fleet, and they wanted to ensure they were on humanity's good side. Others were curious. They wanted to understand how a species ranked so low on the index had defeated a species ranked so high. They sent a delegation to Station Terminus. They were the second-ranked species on the Cosmic Terror Index, psychic parasites feared across the galaxy. Their representative requested a meeting with Ambassador. "We have analyzed your methods," they said. "It looked like a mass of tentacles surrounding a single unblinking eye. Your psychological weapons are crude compared to our abilities. We can touch minds directly. You can only influence through external stimuli. Waited, though was not finished. And yet your methods achieved something we have never accomplished. You made the Dominion fear, truly fear. We can cause pain. We can cause madness. But fear requires understanding. It requires knowing what lies in the dark corners of a mind and pulling it into the light. The creature's tentacles shifted in what might have been respect. We wish to study your methods. We will offer fair exchange. Our knowledge for yours. It was the first of many such requests. Species across the galaxy wanted access to human horror media, to human psychological research, to the vast catalog of nightmares that humanity had built over 40,000 years. Some wanted to use it as a weapon, as humanity had. Others simply wanted to understand. The Galactic Archivists updated their models again. They added a new section to humanity's file, documenting the species' unique relationship with fear. Humans were afraid of almost everything, they noted. Darkness, heights, deep water, closed spaces, open spaces, being alone, being watched. The list went on for pages. No other species had documented so many of their own fears. But that documentation was precisely what made humans dangerous. They had mapped their own psychological weaknesses with scientific precision, and anything that could be mapped could be weaponized. 5 years after the Dominion retreat, retired from diplomatic service, she returned to Earth and spent her remaining years teaching at a university, passing on her knowledge to the next generation. When students asked her about the war, she told them the truth. Fear is not weakness, she would say. Fear is information. Every nightmare teaches you something about how your mind works. Every monster in every story shows you what your brain considers a threat. Humanity spent 40,000 years cataloging our own fears because we knew, somewhere deep down, that understanding fear was the key to surviving it. She would pause then, looking out the window at a sky that now held both promise and danger. The galaxy learned to fear by conquering others. We learned to fear by conquering ourselves. That difference almost destroyed us. In the end, it saved us. The Cosmic Terror Index continued to evolve. The archivists refined their models, adding new categories and metrics. They tracked humanity's growing influence, the species' gradual expansion into galactic affairs, and they watched with great interest as human culture spread. Horror movies became popular entertainment across dozens of species. Human fear-based media was translated into hundreds of languages, adapted for alien psychologies. Species that had never experienced true fear before found themselves lying awake at night, troubled by images and sounds that should not have affected them. The archivists added another notation to humanity's file: primary export, nightmares. 200 years after the Dominion War, humanity was no longer unclassifiable. The archivists had finally developed models sophisticated enough to measure psychological warfare capability. By their new metrics, humanity ranked in the top 50 of all cataloged species, not because humans had bigger ships or better weapons, but because they had demonstrated mastery over something more fundamental than physical force. They had proven that fear could be understood, controlled, and directed. They had shown that the thing which made prey vulnerable could also make it dangerous. And then, at the edge of known space, humanity made contact with a new species. They called themselves the Nightmare Merchants. They came from the Andromeda Galaxy, far beyond the territories mapped by the archivists, and when human diplomats met with them for the first time, they recognized something familiar. The Nightmare Merchants understood fear, not as the Dominion understood it as a tool for conquest, not as they understood it as a side effect of mental invasion. They understood it the same way humans did, as an art form, as a science, as something to be studied, refined, and ultimately mastered. Their first cultural exchange lasted 3 days. Human diplomats shared 40,000 years of horror. The Nightmare Merchants shared something equally vast, a collection of fears from a different galaxy, a different evolutionary history, a different set of dark corners. Both sides came away changed. Both sides came away impressed. The Galactic Archivists received reports of the meeting and immediately requested data. A second species with humanity's particular capabilities complicated their models significantly. They would need to create new categories, new metrics, new ways of understanding what fear truly meant. But the archivists were patient beings. They had been keeping records for 12,000 years. They could adapt. In her final years, learned about the nightmare merchants through news reports. She was too old to travel, too tired to participate in first contact. But she smiled when she read about the cultural exchange, about the way two species from different galaxies had found common ground in their understanding of fear. Humanity was no longer alone. Somewhere out there, another species had walked the same dark path, had stared into the same abyss and learned to stare back. The universe was vast and full of terrors, but humanity had learned long ago that the darkness was not something to flee from. It was something to understand, something to map, and when necessary, something to share. The Cosmic Terror Index had started as a measure of destruction. Now it measured something more complex. Now it measured not just the capacity to inspire fear, but the capacity to understand it. And by that measure, humanity had finally earned its place among the stars.